finance. Tarek, the floor is yours. You have 20 minutes.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Should I share my PowerPoint?
Yes, you can share your screen with us.
Okay.
By the way, Tarek is, I think, sitting in front of Süleymaniye Mosque in main campus of Istanbul University.
Yeah, this is the well-known background of Istanbul University Library.
Yes. It is the view from our library. And okay, yes, Tarek.
Okay, thank you for having me. Today I'll present you the work about the effect of institutions on economic growth in Muslim countries. As you said, I am a PhD candidate in Istanbul University Department of Islamic Economics and Finance. If we have a quick look at to the presentation flow, I will make a short introduction. Then I'll give some brief ideas about the classical growth model on economics. Then we will propose our revised model. Then we will show our statistical and visual results and conclude and finish our presentation. So in the world, there are nearly 50 countries whose populations are at least 50% Muslims, and unfortunately, which of almost all show poor economic and have internal socio-economic problems. It's a big question that why Muslim countries are economically poor and cannot show stable economic development. And generally, the answer is found at the low education level and non-institutional structures. Good governance approach argues that if a state ensures efficient markets, for example, by enforcing property rights, rule of law, reducing corruptions, etc., it says that the private investors will come and drive the economic development itself. So in this work, we try to examine the relationship between institutions and economic growth for the 8 countries. Those are Bangladesh, Indonesia, Iran, Malaysia, Egypt, Nigeria, Pakistan, and Turkey. The institutions were taken as the voice and accountability, rule of law, regulatory equality, political stability and absence of violence or terrorism, control of corruption, and government effectiveness. So the classical growth model proposes that it is proposed by Robert Slow in 1956. It says that the output of a country, economic output of a country, is a production function of its capital stock, its technology level, and its labor force. Here the technology comes from exogenous, which says that it is imported outside of the country. But in the 80s, economists said that economic growth itself has to be included in the model. So those theories called indigenous growth theory, and it says that the development of a nation's human capital, human development, and institutions makes the economic growth by the new forms of technological process. So this is called the total factor productivity. Our proposed model is a revised version of the solo growth model. So we revised the model by introducing the institutional factors as the total factor productivity, in addition to the capital stock and labor force. Alpha, beta, and gamma i's are the internal parameters. So using this model, we will test the hypothesis that capital stock, labor force, and each of the 6 of the institutions has impact effect on economic growth. To look at the data, we will examine the model using the yearly data from 1996 to 2017 for the 8 countries. For capital stock and labor force, we took the data from Penn World Table 9.1. For the institutions data, we got the data from World Bank Data Bank Worldwide Governance Indicators database. The data is ranging from -2.5 to +2.5, refers that the negative extreme says that the country is poorly institutionalized, and the positive extreme says that the country is supremely institutionalized. So our data definition is Y is the output of the economy. It is real GDP at constant 2011 national prices in millions of dollars. Capital stock is again the constant national prices in millions of dollars in 2011. L is the number of persons engaged in the employment. G1 to G6 is the institution level. So this was our model, but this is a nonlinear model. To be able to fit a linear model, to fit the data, we transformed this model by taking the natural logs of both sides and add a theta parameter to have a perfect multilinear regression model. So using this linear model, we will fit classical OLS pooled regression and fixed effect panel data regression. So we will use two different fittings. RStudio and PLM package in R is used for the model and analysis. And we will compare the results statistically and visually. So we expect the coefficient signs of the model to be all positive because all of the inputs, these are independent variables. We expect them to affect the economic output in a positive manner. So let's look at some descriptive statistics. This is the correlation matrix of the economic outputs of the countries. They are generally correlated to each other, but the highest correlation is between Bangladesh and Malaysia, and the lowest correlation is between Indonesia and Iran. This is the summary statistics of the institution. As I said, it's ranging from minus to plus 2.5. The means of all the institutions for the D8 countries is negative, unfortunately, which is a bad thing. That says that the institutions are not a good level according to the data. And this is the correlation matrix of the, again, institutions in the pooled data. We can see that there are some correlations between the institutions. So this is the pair plots for a quick visual analysis. Again, we can see the linear dependencies between the institutions, linear relations. There are also some relations between the outputs and institutions level, but they are not perfectly linear. This indicates a dynamic factor between the countries, maybe. So again, in the model fitting phase, we used RStudio and PLM package. And we fitted two multi-regression models to see the best result. The first model is the classical ordinary least squares model. This is the multilinear regression model of the all pooled data. And the second one is the fixed effect panel data regression. And this model should give us the country-specific and time-dependent relationships between the variables. So this is the fitting results in R. For the classical model. As we can see, we have a high R square and adjusted R square values, which means the variation in the model can be explained within the model. P-value is very, very small, and all of the coefficients are significantly, statistically significant at 5% level, except one, the G3. And three of the coefficients are negative, which means that they affect the economic output, not a positive manner, negative manner. It is interesting. And this is the panel data analysis, again in R. Now we have higher R square and adjusted R square values. Again, p-value is very small, and we have residual sum of squares almost 1/6 compared to the classical model here. Now we have less significantly statistically significant coefficients. and only one of them is negative. It is the G3. So to compare these two models, two linear fittings, fixed effect model seems to be superior to the classical model. But we will make an F-test to see it statistically again. So we will test the models with H0 hypothesis that fixed effect model is significant than OLS model. This is the fitting result. This is the test result, sorry. And p-value is very, very small. So we can easily say that the fixed effect model is superior to the classical model. So we will continue with the fixed effect model. This is the, again, estimated versus real values of output, both of fixed effect and OLS, to see the visual fittings. Again, the black dots corresponds to the estimates of the fixed effect model, and circles are the classical model. We can see the close to perfect linearity in fixed effect model, and the right hand side is the plottings of the residuals, and we can see less variation again. So this is also visually approves the fixed effect model performs well. Again, these are the residual histogram and QQ plots. So we see normality here. We can conclude that fixed effect model explains the economic output with data in hand and with this model. So we will test our hypothesis now. Our hypotheses were here, again, capital stock, labor force, and each of the 6 institutions has impact effect on economic growth. So we will use the p-values of the fixed effect model here, and we can see that we cannot reject H1, H2, H4, 6, and 8, and say that these are the impact effect on economic growth model, and we reject the 3 hypotheses. They are not, they do not have impact effect on economic growth. So here is our final model, again in a numeric way. Our model consists of capital stock, labor force, and 3 institutions here. As we can see, one of the institutions, which is G2, it corresponds to H4, political stability and absence of violence and terrorism, has an impact effect on economic growth, but in a negative manner. This means that if political stability is high, the economic growth will decrease. This is illogical. This seems illogical, but this is a statistical analysis. So the data will give such a result. So to conclude our presentation, we tried to examine the relationship between the economic growth and institutional factors of the 8 countries. We saw that the fixed effect model performs very well for the modeling. We found that capital stock, labor force, and 3 institutions have impact effects on economic growth, and one of the institutions showed negative effects. In addition to the conclusion, we can say that statistical models do not necessarily indicate a causality relationship. It is a statistical relationship. It says something from the data. So, as in our work, it says that if political stability gets higher, the economic growth decreases, or vice versa. If the political stability decreases, economic growth increases. But we propose a further research to improve the model that includes the causality relationships between the country dynamics to get an accurate result, to see the dependencies between the institutions and the economic growth. This was the end of my presentation. Thanks for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Tarık, for your presentation. I think it's better to get questions after the second speaker. So The second speaker presenter is Rania Nasir. She's a graduate student at the Institute of Business Administration, University of the Punjab, Pakistan. And she has experience in the field of finance as well. And she received many grants and scholarship awards. And her title is Monetary Policy in Islamic Economic, Learning from Practical World. The floor is yours, dear Rania. Could you please unmute? Okay.
In the name of Allah, the most merciful and the most beneficent. Assalamu alaikum. Am I audible?
I can not hear very clearly, right?
Am I audible now?
Yes, now
Okay.
it's good. Yes, thank you.
Okay, in the name of Allah, the most merciful and the most beneficent. Today here I am to discuss about the Islamic monetary policy, learning from the practical world. Since in the previous researches, we have seen that Islamic monetary policy had impact on the economic growth. But in the real world, first of all, there are only very few countries which opted Islamic monetary policy, which are Iran and Sudan. But the economic conditions of both countries are not in good state. So here we come with two research questions. Our first question is the Islamic monetary policy is behind the situation, economic situation of these countries or some other factors? Am I audible? Okay. And secondly, why only very few countries opted for Islamic monetary policy? And what we should do in order to improve the current situation? So, to answer this research question, I have opted the methodology of reviewing the detailed analysis of the existing literature in the form of journal articles and newspaper opinions about the monetary policy and inflation. I have chosen the case study of Iran Islamic monetary policy, and since we all know that the one of the imperative or one of the most challenging thing which Iran is facing is inflation, and which also had impact on the economic growth. So in the previous researches, it has been shown that there is a positive and a significant impact of Islamic monetary policy over the economic growth of the Iran. And in the terms of inflation, the results, we have got the mixed results. Inflation, many of the researchers stated that inflation is not a monetary phenomena, but few are some exemptions. They had employed the different empirical researches and different statistical tools, etc. So while conducting the research, the major thing which I have noticed and I want to discuss is that there are some factors which are hindering this Central Bank of Iran to implement the effective monetary policy. The major one is the lack of monetary instruments. This is one of the major challenges faced by the Islamic monetary systems in comparison to the conventional financial system. Secondly, fiscal dominance, fiscal issues of Iran are also playing a role in the implementation of the monetary policy. And there were other factors too. But if we move toward the second research question, why only very few countries opted Islamic monetary policy? So there is a lack of practical successful example in our current era, and we could improve the situation by studying and diagnosing the current models. For instance, the Iran, the Sudan model, their economic system, because they had tried to implement the Islamic monetary policy and they have faced the challenges too in order to opt this model. So they are the practical example. If we study them in detail, extract their problems, and find their solution, the situation could be improved. If we move towards what are the current Islamic finance or economic positions and what are the current challenges faced by these two subjects and how could this situation be improved, then the major problem is also the uniqueness of Islamic finance. For instance, many of the Islamic financial institutions has opted the London interbank rate. For instance, I would give the example of the Pakistan. Islamic banks are also opted the Karachi interbank rate, which the same the conventional banks are opting. So there's a need to do the research and to create the uniqueness of also Islamic finance. Secondly, the central banks, the collaboration between the macroeconomist and the employees of the central bank, because they had the practical exposure and their practical exposure could be translated into the research. And lastly, there's a need of the collaboration between the international banks like Islamic Development Bank. So the researchers could be deployed there, they could get the practical exposure, and research also needs the practical exposures. So they could understand, first they understand what is happening in the Islamic economy so that they can build the foundation from there. So this is all from my side. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. It was a short presentation, I think, but you pointed out very important issues and raised maybe some questions. So just briefly, I want to say a few words about Tariq's presentation and maybe ask a question, and then I will leave the floor to other distinguished fellows and friends. So the concept of development itself is very problematic to me because it is, as it is presented, is one important issues facing most Muslim countries today. So although there are different stages of development, all the Muslim countries at this time are considered as developing countries as per the United Nations countries classification. However, it is important to know or to think about here that actually the discourses on development used to differentiate countries between developing and developed have been debated for a while by also Western economists as well. So one critical discourse, I think, contend that even those countries considered developed are actually still developing. If you take some developed countries, they are still developing, considering that all countries are basically reacting and evolving to cope with different challenges in their own respective economies. So Tariq has mentioned like the effect of institutions on economic growth. So this is one, the first point. That second one is the role or the effect of institutions on economic growth. If I'm not wrong, in the last 4 decades, we can distinguish 3 or 4 main strands in economic growth theories. Neoclassical model, which is based on Solow's growth model, who emphasized the importance of investment and savings. Theory of indigenous growth developed by Romer and Lucas, who took into account human capital and innovation capacity, and the neo-institutional economic theory, which emphasized the role of institutions in economic growth. I think you Tarek, you took neo-institutional economic theory as a ground. So in more recent times, if I'm not wrong, some scholars such as Jeffrey Sachs offers another explanation to the degree of economic development, taking into account the influence that location, climate, and natural resource endowment have on economic performance. For instance, access to seaport or distance from major trading centers involve higher transaction costs and significant constraints on international trade and thus on prosperity. So the question here, I think, relating to the idea of development is, why do Muslims tend to be relatively poor? I think we are trying to, emphasize on this question or issue. The facts are, to me, undisputed, because Muslims make up almost like 19–20% of the world's population, but earn only 6 or 7% of its income. So 90% and 6% of income. So the issue is whether there are any causal relationship between religion and economic development. Because when we are talking about the issue of development, we usually talk about Muslim countries. We don't categorize Western countries, Christian countries, or any other religion. But when it comes to, let's say, Middle East, Gulf, or South East Asia, we usually use Muslim countries. So, I mean, it means that there is a relationship between religion and economic growth. So the issue is whether there are any causal relationship between religion and economic development. So many scholars, to me, suggest that religion is typically not a problem for development, pointing out that Islamic beliefs and values that appear inimical to growth, like the ban of interest and restrictions on some speculations. So the corporation is now an acceptable and popular organizational form in most Muslim countries. Insurance contracts are legally enforceable. Banks are integral component in every Muslim country's economy. I mean, if we look at the economy, their economy. So I think we should consider these points and these issues when we are talking about the issue of development or development issues in the Muslim countries. So I just want to point out these issues, and if you want to talk or answer some of these points, I mean, the questions that I have raised, you are welcome. But I'm sure we may have some questions from other colleagues and participants. Professor Sabri, yes, please.
Thank you, Professor Najmuddin, for this. And Tarek, well done. Thank you for your presentation. Very informative. I will start with some comments on your research methodology. And one of the comment, whether you have checked the nature of your data. Is it normal distributed or not, based on the figures you referred not. So I wonder whether you consider to conduct some tests like what's called kurtosis and skewness to check the normality of whether they are normally distributed or not. Also, another comment rather than question, you refer to OLS regression model, and then you refer to fixed effect model. I wonder how did you just randomly chose fixed effect? Because there is random effect there. You could use random effect model based on the distribution of your data if they are not normally distributed, especially. And you could run a Haussmann test to check whether to use fixed effect or random effect. This is another comment. And also, I didn't see any sensitivity test you run to check the validity of your initial regression model. So the sensitivity test, whether you could use different model to run regression or different variables to, for example, to control, to measure, let's say, economic growth through different, not just GDP only. So I wonder whether you have considered to do this or not. And this is why I came to this specific test, because what encouraged me to raise this with you is that the relationship between political stability and economic growth, which you acknowledge that it's not logical. The higher or the more stable politically the country is, the better economic growth would be, which came negative in your case, and you acknowledge that it's not logical. So I wonder whether the variable used, they are more like strongly correlated. The threat of multicollinearity could be existed, or the threat of indigeneity between the variables. In simple words, it could be that you have used variables that they represent same thing, same impact. So I would advise you, if you have not done so, to consider your tests or run further tests to check your data and to check the multicollinearity between variables. And at the end, of course, random effect, I would strongly recommend you to run it and check the Haussmann test whether the statistically will be chosen to choose the random effect or fixed effect. Yeah, and referring to what Professor Najmuddin in relation to developed and developing country, I totally agree with you, Professor. It's debatable, but yes. So I would leave you with these comments, and if you have any response, you can. But if you don't, I would strongly encourage you to consider them to look at it.
Thank you, Professor Mohammed. Yes, you are right. My work is a bit lack of advanced tests. You are right, especially for the validity of the model itself. But it was a quick work, and I used R and its own inside packages. You are right. But as you said, one of the institutions had negative effects. But it was something that I expect in the beginning, because as you said, if we analyze the developed countries, Western countries, probably everything will be good according to the institutions and development levels. But in Muslim countries, development is something related to, I think, not institutions, the political situation is more important than the institutions, I think, and institutions, politicals affect the institutions. So, for example, if a Muslim country starts to develop, produce something, money, and you know, there are some instabilities inside the political view. So I was expecting that to be negative. In fact, thus I proposed further research to have the dependency relationships in a dynamic view. So this is a statistical model. So it just says the relationships between the numbers. It does not say anything about the dependencies between the institutions, politicals, or worldwide relationships. But I took your comments about the quantitative techniques. Thank you, and I will try to develop my work with this. Thank you again.
Tarık, is this a part of your PhD dissertation or another ongoing?
No, it was a standalone work.
Okay. Thank you. Any other question?
If I may, Professor, again, please.
Sure, please.
On the comment of Tarık. Tarık, when you say statistical correlation, always needs to be reflected logically. So you need to make direct correlation between them. You need to always have justification for such results. So we don't look at statistical relations alone without considering the realities. So I wanted to just highlight this to you as well, please. Thank you.
Okay. Any question? Okay. Kanya, do you want to say anything else or? Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. And of course, we will publish these papers, inshallah, in a volume, and we will you have a chance to work on your papers, and we will read your papers, inshallah, when it is published. Thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you all for your contribution, and hope to see you. Let me see. The next session is in Arabic, and we will meet after 30 minutes, inshallah. 11:30 Turkish and Mecca time, and 4:30 Malaysia, 10:30 Eastern time, inshallah. Thank you very much for your participation. Hope to see you in the second session. Assalamu alaikum.